Welcome to this online meetup. My name is Max, and I do everything education community for Okta Workflows. Today's topic is a guide to conditional logic in Okta Workflows. So we're going to look at various function cards that allow you to set up if-else type logic. And before we get started, this event is recorded, and then we'll have the recording up on YouTube tomorrow. You will receive a message from Zoom with a link to the recording and also any other resources that I share in this meetup. And lastly, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, or you can also put them in the Q&A section. Also, my email is right here in the first box here. So if you have questions after the meetup, please contact me. I'm always happy to answer questions. All right. Also, now this meetup is based on a KB article that I published about 2 weeks ago, and it's right here, a guide to conditional logic and workflow. So what I'm going to be doing, most of it is also in this KB, and I'm going to share this in the chat so you have it, but I will also send it tomorrow. So here's a link to the KB. All right. Okay, well, that's the only slide that I have, and so let's get started. All right, so I'm in workflows. Then I have September 2025. This is the last day of September, and what I'm going to do is, let me scroll up here, go back to this article. So we'll be covering these cards. That's in the branching category. So I'll show you examples of each card and how it works. Okay, so let's go back to workflows, and I'm going to create a flow, and I'm going to use a flow for each card, so just a little bit more straightforward. Now I'm going to click. These are all function cards, and they're all in the branching category, right? So this is logic, branching, or if you want to call it, if else, but there's the assign if, continue if else, if, and then lookup. Okay, so the first one I'm going to do assign if, and then it says, so this is a choose a value based on a true or false condition, right? So let's use that, and let's give this a name, and just give this use the same name as the card. So assign if, right? And then we will also add another card called assign. So the assign card will create a field or variables that we're going to be using throughout the example. So we're going to go call this expanse amount, and we're going to make this to be a number. Also, a little trick. Let me delete this. If you enter an actual number here, it switches to a number automatically. It doesn't happen always. There are some cards where you do need to go and change the type, so just to keep that in mind. All right, but let me go back here. So in general, the branching category, this is where you have cards that allow you to create conditional logic. So at a high level, this is if this is true, then do this, or else do this. Okay, so that's what this branching category does. And looking, let me just quickly see if there are any questions. All right, I don't see any questions. So the first one is the assign if. And what it does is that it compares a value. So we're going to use this expense amount. So the idea is that, this is like an expense report sort of example. I'm going to take the expense amount, and I'm going to, this is going to be value 8. So what the assign if card does is that it checks a condition. Now, but instead of, if this, run these cards or else run these cards, all this particular card does is that it assigns a value. So it's it's a specialized card where, instead of just writing any logic, like putting any cards, any steps. This one is specifically assigning a value to a field. Okay? So I'm saying if value A, if the expense amount, now as for the comparison, we'll be using just one, just using, for example, less than. But as you can see, you're not limited to just, less than or greater than. So there are different operations that you can run. You can also work with, there's an object that has a key, or a list value as well. So again, just keep in mind you're not limited to just less than or greater than. But just to keep it more straightforward, we will use less than as an example. Now, as for the value, other value, so I'm just going to enter it and let's say 250. Right? So again, if value A is less than 250, then it's going to be true. And this is where you assign a value. So I'm going to say approved. And here I'm going to say requires manager's approval, right? Approval. Here we go. So I'm setting the field is setting it to a text or string, but again, you're not limited to just text. Again, you can set any other field type as well. But again, just to keep it more straightforward, we'll use text, right? And then this is going to be the output. So what you could do is then maybe use, let's say, compose card, compose, and just kind of continue. Once you assign the value, you can use it in other flow steps. Okay, so let's run this. And again, I'm using 100. And so 100 is less than 250, which this is true. And then the output is set to approved. And then we have this value of approved. And now we can continue running the flow, using this field, right? Or if we, for example, change to 500 and we run this again, then it says requires manager's approval because 500 is not less than 250, so it's false. And then we're setting this field, or this value, I should say, and then this output field is set to the value. Okay, so this is a kind of a simplified version of if else. But again, if in a more traditional if else, you say if this, then do all these steps, and then else do all these steps. So this one is a specialized version where you only can set a value to a field. Okay, and that's what we did here. So we use text, we're setting a value, and then we can continue running the flow, right? So that's what assign if, that's how the card works. Okay. Now let's move to the next example, and we'll create a new flow. And this one we're going to use also, of course, in the branching. We're going to use continue if, right? So drop continue if, and now let's name the flow continue if. Okay? And as before, we will use expanse amount, and let's put 100 to start with, and then it's like this. Now, so this one is also sort of a specialized version of a if else. Okay, but what this does is that this again will evaluate the condition, and then it will either continue running the flow or it will stop the flow. Okay, so we'll say expense amount, and then we can again select any of these conditions, and let's say less than, and then the value B is going to be again 250. Okay, and then so if this is true, if value A is less than value B, then continue the flow. Okay, and to check that, we can put a compose here, for example, and say the flow is running, right? So this kind of just the other steps in the flow. Now, if this is false, then you can put a message, say, for example, requires manager's approval as an example, right? So let's save this, right? And we'll run this. So again, what this card does is that continue if. So if it's true, if the condition is true, it just continues running the flow. So it's going to run this card, and then if we have other cards, it would run the other cards. Or if it's false, it's just going to halt and stop the flow. That's all it does. So let's run this with 100. Right? And so 100 is less than 250. And then, so notice this is kind of interesting. So if the flow continues to run, the message is actually set to null. So the message is only set to this if it's false. So it's null, and then but it just continues running the flow, right? So you can see the flow is running. Now, if I change this to 500 and click run, so notice now the message is here, is set, but then the compose card was not, we didn't run the compose card because the flow stopped, right? So this is kind of like a informational message to just kind of tell the person who is building the flow or running the flow, hey, we stopped the flow because of this, and this is the message. Okay. So, I see this a lot where you're checking for some condition, and then you need to decide whether you want to continue running the flow or not. So, one typical example is if you're checking, number of days, right? You need to check something for number of days. And then if it's less than the number of days, then you continue the flow. If it's more than the number of days, then you stop the flow, or, the other way around. But again, it's a specialized sort of version of if else, and then it either continues the flow or stops the flow. So that's how the continue if card works. Okay. All right, let's move. Let me see. All right, no questions. Let me move to the next one. And I'm going to turn these flows off. And so what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to come back to the if else. I'm just going to do this lookup because it's a more straightforward card. So I'm going to sort of jump to lookup. And let's give this a name. And as before, we use the assign card. And again, the assign card just creates a field. And we're going to call this region in this case. And I'm going to connect it like this. Now, so I'm gonna copy some values here just to make it go faster. But this one is like a case or a switch statement. If you have a programming experience, you used such a sort of construct where again it's a switch or a case. But let me quickly let me just copy the values that I have prepared in a text node. So this is going to be APAC, and I'm going to pass the value. Now this is going to be the Americas. And put the value. And then the last one is EMEA. And this is the value. And then finally, we can also specify no region found, right? So again, it's going to check all the cases, and whichever it matches, I should say, it will use that case. But if there's no match, it will just return this one, right? And so for the region, let's say we put, right, MAA, and if we can run this, then the result, right, it matched in one of the cases, and this is the result. And then if I put a region doesn't exist, for example, then it will return no region found. Okay, and then you can of course continue. So if I wanted to put something like compose card, right? So this is the result. and then we can just continue running it. So if I run this again, right, it just continues running with this, and this is the value. All right, so this is how the lookup card works. And again, it works like a case or switch statement in the traditional programming languages. All right, moving to the next one. Turn this off. I'm going to, let's look at the branching again. And so now we're coming to if else. Let's do if else. Let's actually, let's give it a name first. If else. And let's, as before, we'll set up a field with expanse amount and put 100. Notice again, it switches to a number here. And then we'll do expense amount, and as before, less than 250. Again, as previous cards, the comparison, again, you can use different operators here. And now notice I'm going to click save, and notice what happens is that it switches to this view. And this is the traditional if else that I was mentioning earlier, where, you know, if this, then you can specify what cards to run, or else you specify the cards to run. So right here, you can use any actions from any of the connectors that you have, or you can also use any functions. So for example, compose, let's say, you know, that just keep it straightforward. We'll say approved. And on this side, we'll say also compose, and then requires manager's approval. All right. Right. And again, if you want, you can add more cards here as well. So you can really run as any logic that you need, whether in the if, in the true branch, or the false branch. Now, it has one more important capability, is that you can also create outputs. And so let me show you how it looks. Is that I'm going to create an output. And then depending on the branch, it's going to set the output to the value from the branch. So I'm first going to connect like this. So the if goes into the true one goes into the first one, and then the false goes into the second one, right? And then if I do a compose card at the end, I don't take these fields, but I take this one because it will only be set to either the true branch or the false branch, right? Like this. What I usually do is, because it looks a little bit like output, 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 it's just not as clear what it does. So what you could do is you can rename these fields to maybe approved, right? And maybe you can say not approved, all right? And then you can even change this one if you want. So maybe to something like, I don't know, expanse. Well, expense is fine, all right? So just to give it more context. But let's see how this works now. Let's run this. And so 100, right? So we can see that 100 is less than 250, right? The condition is right here. So we're entering the true branch, and then the output, or which we renamed to expense, is set, the value is set to approved. Now we can see that it's the approved value here. If we run this again, but with a larger amount, so 500? Let's run this. So now the false branch, right? Because we can see, because 500 is not less than 250, so it runs with the false branch, and then we set the output or the expense that we renamed to requires manager's approval, and then that's the value that we can now continue working with, you know, in other cards or in subsequent steps in the flow. All right. So Yeah, the if else is the more traditional, if else, function where if you run some cards or else you run some cards. And then this is optional, but usually there's some output that you get from whatever cards you run, and then you can continue whatever the output is, you can continue running the flow, right? Now, one thing I'm going to show you is that if you remember the continue if card, so we can actually build this to work like the continue if, and that's what I was saying in the beginning, that this is kind of a continue was a specialized version. Is that right here I can add another function, return. All right, so let's say if it's false, just as an example, I just want to stop running the flow, right? And so notice what this does is that it's going to actually stop running the entire flow, right? Because they put the return. It's actually not going to run the compose card, right? So it's just going to stop the flow. Let's see how this works. We still have the 500 here. So running. All right. So notice it went into the false branch and then it ran this card, but notice that the compose is empty because it stopped the flow, right? And we never reached the compose card, right? So that's kind of in a way how the continue if card works. But again, just keep that in mind, that if you put a return card in any of the branches, it will stop the flow, right? It will not exit the if else card, it will just stop the flow. Because there is another card which works differently. And so that's why I'm sort of showing it to you, right? So this is how the if else card works. If you need to change the condition, so it says condition here, so you can click the pencil and you're back here, and you can change the comparison here and then click save and you're back here. All right. So, all right. Let's look at the last card. Actually, this is the one before last. There's one more card I want to show you. So let's turn this off. Let's create a new flow. And then now we're going to use go to branching, clear the search here. If else if. And as before, let's give this a name, if else if. Okay. And let's give this a sign. And then I didn't want to create this one. Sorry. Expanse amount. Yeah, if you need to change it manually, it will. If you enter a number, it will switch to a number. But yeah, sometimes you do need to go and change the type. So I'm going to go to number, change it to 100. And so here, you can create multiple conditions. So if the else if had just a true and a false, that's it. If this, then if this is true, then continue, or else. This one allows you to create multiple conditions. So you can do if this, or else if, else if, and then else. Right? Let me show you. So first, this is the if one, and I'm going to take the expense amount, and then same different operators. So let's do less than. Let's do 100. So notice here that this one doesn't change to a number automatically, right? So you have to be sort of careful, or you might not get, or the if might not evaluate correctly, or at least the way you expected. So here you do need to change to a number, right? And then you click save. And now by default, it has two if and else, but there's a plus, right? And you can click this plus here to create another if else, right? But before we do that, let's finish this one. So to add cards that you want to run, if this is true, you click this plus and say, I'm going to do a compose, and we'll just say approved. Let's say this is just what the employee can approve, right? We're going to say this. Actually, we're going to change this to 50. All right. Anyhow, so this is the first if. Now, how do you go back is that you select here, click edit conditions, and you're back. Let's add another if or if else. Notice we got another if else, and then I'm gonna click. And let's say if it's less than 250, then I'm gonna add cards. And let's say this requires manager's approval. So manager, manager approves, let's say. Approves, all right? And then lastly, we're going to go to the else, right? If the amount is even larger, then we need finance. So we'll say finance approves, right? So we got the three conditions, right? If you need to add one more if, then you press this plus. And then if you need to modify the card that run, if this branch is true, then you click this plus and it goes opens like this. All right. Now let's also create the outputs as before. So I'm going to click outputs and I'm going to use output, and then it creates the three sub outputs for each branch. And again, I'm going to rename this just so it's I think it's a good practice. So this is say approved. And then I take this approved and drag it here. Then I go here, switch to the next branch, and we'll call this manager. And then, oh, right. And then the last one is the else, and we'll call this finance. And, all right. Sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. No. Okay, here we go. All right. And then right here on the other side, we're going to use an assign card, let's say, instead of compose. And then I'm going to say output like this. So this is going to hold the value of the branch that was actually true. All right, let's save this. So, oh, do I want to exit? Okay, if Elseif, here we go. So we got the three conditions. We got the amount 50. So let's run this. All right, so you can see approved. And then you can enter. So if I open this one, you can see that this compose didn't run. But if I go to the first one, you can see the check mark here and the value. So you can see this one ran, right? And then it's set to approve, and this says approved. And no, I don't want to do that. And let's run this again. I'm going to set this to, let's see what we have. Let's say to 200. Let's run this. Right now, because this one is true, now the manager approves it. And then the last one, we're going to say there's a lot of expenses, so 1,000. Run this. And then finance approves. All right. So this is the if else if card. So it's again works similarly to if else, but then you can create more conditions. So if I wanted to create one more, I would do it here. And then if you want to delete it, like I'm going to delete this one, so you press here, remove. All right. I do so. Another example I want to show you is using the return statement. But let me see. There's one question that I see. Let me look at it quickly. There's a question if I need to enter an amount for finance. I could, but I just decided everything else, just use it, anything sort of above 250 is going to fall under the else. So, but yeah, I could also enter a specific amount for finance if that's the requirement. So, but yeah, you're just gonna everything. If it's 1,000, so this is false, and then that's the That's the branch is going to be true. But what I want to show you is now is, if you remember, I added a return statement in the if else, and then it just stopped the flow. But let me do the same thing here. So if I go here in the finance, and I'm going to add a return, right? I'm going to return. And then on the assign card, let me switch to this view. On the assign card, I'm just going to add a static value. Just, say amount is too big, right? That's fine. The amount is too big. It corrects me. So this is actually going to work a little bit different, is that in the previous, the if-else card, it stopped the flow, right? So it's kind of straightforward. Now, the way this function works is that there is an anonymous helper flow, right? That's there. And if you work with helper flows, is that if you return from helper flow, right, it stops the helper flow, but it returns to the calling flow. So because there is an anonymous helper flow here, right, it will stop the helper flow, right? But then it returns to the main flow, which is this flow here. So it's actually going to continue running. So again, what the if else, the previous example, it stopped the flow, right? It's just there is no anonymous helper flow. With this one, because there is an anonymous helper flow, sort of just built in, it will stop the helper flow, but then it will return to the main flow, right? And then we're going to continue. So let me show you how this looks. All right. So notice we exited here. And the reason I know is that notice the output is not set. So it stopped the if-else if card, right? It did not set the output, but it exited this card or this helper flow and then continued. And notice that this is empty, right? As expected, because it didn't get any value. But the static value is set, which means it continued running and it set this value. All right. So keep in mind as you're working with this is that, so there's a difference if you use a return in else if versus if else if card. All right. All right. One last example I want to show you, and that's and this one, it's from a different category, but it's the error handling. It's called if error. Right? If error. And it actually it allows to run cards, and then it will also will handle an error. So if an error happens, it will switch to the if error branch, right? And then will allow you to continue running the flow. So in general, if there is an error, the flow stops. But if you need to be able to handle the error and then continue running the flow, so you could use this card. So I'm going to use the Okta connector in this case, and let's say get user groups, for example. And this doesn't matter, so we can collapse this. I'm going to enter, right? And if I want, I can test this card quickly, and I get some groups, so this works. All right. And maybe for the outputs, let's create output, and I'm actually, what I want to do is say I want to return the number of groups. So this is a list, right? And I'm just going to return the number of groups that I have. But if it fails, I want to run this branch. And let's say I just want to return the error code, right? So I'm going to add the new property, new field here, status code, right? And so I know there is status code because when you look at the error, when you run it, it has this property, it's just not exposed on this card. So you can edit this property here. And we're just going to return it like this. Oh, I didn't give it a name. So if error, right? So let's run this. And now, for now, this is going to work fine. So let's run this. We have no error, right? And so if I look at the outputs, I get 2 groups here. Although I thought I have more groups, but well, I guess I will need 2. Okay, so it returns number of groups, and then I can continue running the flow, right? But if I enter something like this, which will return an error message, so let's run this. Right, notice there is an error. So, if I didn't have the error handling, it would just stop the flow. But if I go to the if error branch, right, notice that this is the error, and you can look at the error, and the status code is right here. So that's why I added it to the card. And then if there are any other fields that are missing, you can add them the same way. And then it returned the error code, and let me see, what's the value where is the value that it returned? Wait, I was expecting, let me quickly back. Status code. Oh, sorry, let me do this. This is just the way it looks here. Let's do this. Compose. And let's do this output like this. All right. So yeah, it's when you look at it here, it kind of dumps the whole thing here, which is not very sort of, yeah, you only want to see the error code itself. But you can see here it's 404. So that's what I did here. But anyhow, this is the last card that I wanted to show you. It's not from the branching category, it's from the error handling. But it kind of also, has kind of if else, if error card, which is again very, very useful. I know that, it's a common question for folks. How do you handle errors, or how do you handle an error and you just continue running the flow? So this is one way you can do it. All right. I hope, let me know if you have any questions. But I hope this was helpful. Again, this is based on this KB. I'm going to share it again, and I will also include it in the email that you will receive tomorrow. But other than that, yeah, I hope this was helpful. You got my email here. I'll put it in chat for you also. Let me know if you have any questions, and via email, let's see. All right, I don't see any questions, so that's good. Hopefully this was straightforward. And then, yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for attending. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.